don't ever give up on where you're heading and what your dreams are. Sometimes you make the decision with the best information you have and you just go with it.
Most pilots don't understand what career opportunities are available in the world of aviation. They're making career decisions based on advice from friends or posts on internet forums, meaning they are taking huge risks with their livelihood without having all the details. This podcast was created to help you understand the aviation industry so you can find your dream job. Let's get ready for Pushback. Here's your host and my dad, Nick Fialka.
Hey, pilot, I'm Nick Fialka, and today we are talking all things lighter than air. I have my good friend Andy Rose, who used to fly the Goodyear Blimp, and it's just such an interesting conversation. Andy is so articulate and has a hilarious way with words. You're going to really enjoy this. If you've ever thought about flying the Goodyear Blimp, go for it, y'all. It just seems like one of the coolest things in the world. So sit back, relax. Let's get ready for Pushback. Hey, pilot, did you just get a new conditional job offer? Are you getting out of the military and going to move your family across the country? Are you going to move in base somewhere, or are you going to go out to find that second home that you've been looking for? Well, I want you to stop right now, pick up the phone, and call Marty and the team at Trident Home Loans. It's an organization that's run by pilots. They understand pilot pay. They understand contracts. They understand military. They have the best VA loans in the United States. Marty and his team have been doing mortgages for years. They've been doing my mortgages for years. I trust him and his team more than any other organization. I challenge you to get a better deal anywhere else. Go ahead, reach out, get a mortgage quote, and then call Marty and his team. They will walk you through the process and show you how competitive their rates are. So go right now, TridentHomeLoans.com, and check them out. All right, my friend Andy Rose is with me today. Hi, Andy. How are you?
Hey, I am doing great. How are you doing today?
Man, I'm so good. It's a fantastic day. You and I have been playing this phone tag game for quite a while, trying to balance our schedules and find some time to talk. And here we are, and we're going to talk all about the Goodyear Blimp, which I think is so cool. But before we jump into it, you have a real interesting history that predates all of that. So tell the pilot that's listening just a little bit about yourself and kind of how you came up in this industry.
You bet. So I guess my overall message for the background is don't ever give up on where you're heading and what your dreams are. So I didn't come from an aviation background. I came from a really small town in central Kansas. So it was a great place to grow up. It was really small. I graduated 20th in my high school, but unfortunately that was just out of 17 people. I mean, not to bag on it, but I mean, 7 years, high school was the best 7 years of my life. But after graduating that, I just went to a state school or university, got a business degree, got an accounting degree, started in just kind of public accounting, corporate America, and kind of just realized that I wanted to do more, but I didn't really know what. So I was on an audit, happened to be sitting in the Dallas airport, working on papers, audit stuff, and was listening to the captain that was flying my flight home. And he was like, "Oh man, I am so tired. I've had to work 3 days this week." And I had been working like 20 some straight days. And I'm like, he's on to something. So then I started to kind of follow up. And I guess my message out of that was kind of find your joy, find your why. I didn't really have a huge bug for aviation. I didn't take my first flight and go, "Oh yeah, cue the Top Gun music. This is for me." It was more, I like this time off. And that's what kind of started me down the journey. So I just, nothing special, just weekends, nights, going out to a local flight school and just kind of work through my licenses and ratings. I wish I had some cool story, but I really don't. That was really it.
How long were you doing accounting before you decided you were going to go full-time and commit to an aviation career?
I'd say it was just shy of 10 years. So,
kidding.
I switched over in probably by the time I was done, because I was doing both for a while. It was about 10 years when I finally left the last accounting job and stepped over to aviation full time. And that last accounting job, interestingly enough, was with Lehman Brothers, and that was right before the collapse. So I was actually doing audit in the background right before the financial meltdown, and I actually got to see some of that stuff the media was talking about. It was crazy that I was like, maybe that was a good time to step out.
That was a perfect pivot time. Wow, it's very serendipitous.
Yeah.
I mean, for those of you that don't know about Lehman Brothers, you should hop over to some Lehman Brothers YouTube videos after this episode.
Yeah.
That's
wild.
Man.
Yeah, so that was kind of the pivot. I happened to get an interview with American Eagle because I was a little bit older and had kind of this business background. And that was the dark days of interviewing. The interview was 2 days long. I know this is going to sound crazy to a lot of your listeners. There were, I think, 22 of us that started the day. 3 of us made it to training. They walked the first guy out after 30 minutes. It was pretty brutal back then. So, but you know what? Build character.
Yeah, it's a great testament to the evolution and how things change, because I can see a scenario where if the economy takes a nosedive and hiring keeps getting pulled back, that it can get very competitive, and the hiring departments can pull all sorts of levers. They can reinstitute all of those things in the 2-day interviews instead of just this. I mean, some of them last year were just like, hey, here's your start date when,
right,
show up.
Yeah, that later in life when I was doing trainings, I had become the old man in the group, and they all loved those stories of, wait, it was 2 days? Well, what was what part of it? And I'm like, well, after you did all the interviews, and then you did the cognitive reasoning test, then you went to the full motion sim and did a check ride, and then you came back the next day for the rest of it. So you're right. I mean, it could go back to that, and it just depends on the demand in the industry. That's how it's always been. I guess that's probably how it always will be.
Yeah. So you got your job at Eagle.
Yes.
Back when it was still Eagle.
Yeah, back when it was the original American Eagle. And that's,
how long did you stay there?
Let's see, the first time, because you and I knew each other there later, the first time I was there 2 years. And that's when the first kind of pilot shortage started to kind of hit the news, right before they pushed it to 65. So within the span of 5 days, I was going from upgrade to furlough because they pushed it to 65, and all of a sudden they didn't need us anymore. So
that's right.
I know it was crazy times, right? So I had kind of seen that maybe on the horizon. So I'd kind of started interviewing in other places. And then that's when I got a job at SkyWest, and I got Denver based, which at the time I was living in Denver. So I eliminated my commute, and I thought it was going to be more of a stable position. But then that's when everything really fell apart. And I sat on reserve for 4 years. I didn't move a seniority number for 4 years. And those were some pretty dark times. Like, I could always find, with snow in Denver, I could always find my car in the parking lot because I had the pizza delivery sign on the top of it. Because that's how you could identify, FO's car back in the day was, they'd fly because pay wasn't real good, and then they'd deliver pizzas at night. So
is that did you literally deliver pizza?
I didn't at that time. I had in the past, but that was kind of always the running joke. Or what's the difference between a airline or a regional pilot and a large pizza? Is a large pizza could feed a family of 4.
Yeah.
So, but those were the times back then. So I ended up at SkyWest, and I sat there for 8 years. Like I said, didn't move into seniority number for 4. Took 4 more years, so 8 years. And if you're doing the math, plus the 2 at Eagle, I was eligible for upgrade in a very short 10 years. So, yeah. And then that is when the Goodyear Blimp job just kind of fell in my lap. So
this is interesting, okay? Because you're at a regional. Was it a financial reason? Was Goodyear paying more money? Was that going to be your final destination? What led the calculus to decide, like, I've already been flying in regionals for a decade. I'm gonna trade it all and go fly the Goodyear Blimp?
That's a great question because there's two or three pieces in there. So yes, financially, the blimp paid more even after upgrade at the regionals back then. It paid more. And I'd say going forward now, and I don't exactly know their pay rates, but they're probably right on par with regional captains, at least, if not higher. Their benefits at Goodyear were more on par with like a major airline. So those were definitely considerations. The hard part was, I'd lived in Colorado for 25 years, had my home, everything established, and I was going to have to pick up and move everything to South Florida. So that was, a family decision, right? Like all of a sudden change everything. My wife had a really good job at the time, so she was going to be leaving her job, and all of my family lived there. We didn't have any family down in South Florida, so maybe that was a benefit. Who knows, right? Get a little distance, but so those were also considerations. And then the fact that I was headed to upgrade after all of that time, was finally going to be an airline captain, if you will, and then just switching and doing that. But it was kind of that, I've always taken that philosophy, never pass up an opportunity. So after my wife and I kind of talked about it, and, keeping in mind, like, situations are always different. It's just my wife and I, no kids. So it was a lot easier. We weren't pulling kids out of school. It was a lot easier to make those decisions. So, and she had a job that could travel, if you will. So it wasn't like it was married to anything in Colorado. So she would be able to find a job down there. And so a lot of different considerations, plus the fact, it's the Goodyear Blimp. You got to go do that, right? So
cool.
Yeah.
Tell me about the interview. What was the interview process like? Was it a 2-day thing like the regional were at the same time?
It was kind of more of a corporate job interview. And for those of you like yourself that have done the corporate world, and I don't mean like corporate aviation, I mean like corporate business. So there was a phone screen, an HR screen, and then I got the invite to an in-person. So then I flew up to Akron and met with everybody there, the whole team that was there. And a couple things in that, and I had kind of a little bit of a heads up. I had a buddy that was at Goodyear already, and he says, "Hey, they're going to catch you off guard on this. They're going to pull out a sectional chart on you and ask you what things mean." Yes, he's smiling already, right? And so I was just waiting on it. So I'm in there with the kind of the director of flight ops, the head guy, and then the chief pilot for the Akron base. And he goes, "Well, I got a few questions for you." He pulls out the sectional chart. I looked at him just deadpan. I'm like, "What's that?" So, but anyway, I'd had the heads up and stuff, and it kind of broke the tension and stuff. So we went through that, and then they kind of, it's also kind of a PR interview. They want to see if you can talk on camera, because a lot of the job is just marketing, right? You're talking about Goodyear, you're flying the blimp everywhere you go. You're kind of a minor celebrity. You're doing interviews with the local papers, and they say, "Are you pretty good at storytelling?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm pretty good." And they said, "Do you tell stories often, and can you do it without swearing?" And I'm like, "I do. I tell good stories every damn day." And they just said,
"Yeah."
So that was kind.
Were you laying out? I've known you for a long time, and you lay out these funny one-liners and these sideways little like subtle jokes.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Were you doing that in the
interview? I actually did, because they wanted to. They kind of want, it's PR. Can you be personable, or are you just the guy sitting there in the suit, and just regurgitating information, like the airline interview? And some of these guys were from the airline, so they knew, right? Yeah. So then after that, I got the green light, thank goodness. So then I came down to Florida, and I met the team there, and kind of had to get, their blessing and everything. And then after that, they called me and made me the offer. And I couldn't say I accept fast enough. It was just the timing was terrible. So we had to go do it. Right. So, because opportunities are never going to come at the right moment.
Man, isn't that the truth?
So
gosh,
you just going back on them, you always think, "Oh, okay, now that worked out," but looking forward into them, you're like, "I don't know if that's going to work or not."
You just gotta. I tell people about that. Should I do this? Should I do that? It's funny. It's like the stock market, right? Like it's going to go up, it's going to go down. Should you time it? No, you should always be buying. Right. Always just make your decision and tear the Band-Aid off and just go.
So true. That's so true. Yeah. So, we basically just sold everything, loaded it on a truck and moved to South Florida. We'd never been there, just for the interview, and started looking for a place. And I got to hand it to my wife. And that's why I want to add this, like in this industry, it is just imperative. And I know you'll agree with this. You've got to have the support of your close family, or this job will just be a nightmare for you. And my wife was just 100% on board. I was going to training. I went to Akron and was gone for training. And, so she packed up the house. She moved it across country. She found a house down there. She found a job. Like, she was in the process of buying a house. When I got down there after training, we had one day that I could either go yay or nay. So I went that afternoon and looked at the house and went, okay, this will work. So without her, none of this would have been possible whatsoever.
That's so funny. That's how we bought this house that I'm in right
Is
now.
it really?
It's
See?
basically.
Yeah. That's exactly my point. Absolutely. Yeah. and I know that kind of, for probably some of your listeners and people getting into the industry, that's going to sound weird. It's actually pretty normal in our job.
It is. And a pilot, if you are the pilot who's got something in front of you, you have to, I tell people, like, make your pro con list and then make your decision.
Yes.
And then burn your pro con list.
Yeah.
And just go with your decision. That's it. Don't look back. Don't even think about the other thing. And that's, there's a lot. I talked to a friend of mine the other day who was flying with, one major, went to a big cargo carrier who is not hiring right now. And he thought he was at his dream job, and then they stopped hiring, and he's a couple hundred off the bottom. And now he's going to go to another major,
right,
and leave the cargo. So he went from one major to the cargo to another major. And he basically, if he would have just stayed at that first major, would have like 5 years of seniority, and is starting over from scratch, like post haste. And he's okay with that because he just made his decision. Yeah. You got the information you have at hand, and you just go with it. And that's all you can possibly do.
It is. His life, your comments are exactly like mine. Like, I'm on counting Goodyear, like 121 job number 6 and counting Goodyear number 7. So sometimes you make the decision with the best information you have, and you just go with it.
Timothy P. Pope is a certified financial planner dedicated to guiding professional pilots through smart financial planning. Whether it's saving for retirement, investment management, a seamless military transition, or strategic tax planning, Tim is your trusted financial partner. Also, you can join Tim as he leads engaging discussions on personal finance and strategies for professional pilots on the brand new Pilot Money podcast. Timothy P. Pope, helping professional pilots make the most out of life. Yeah. Well, you mentioned training in Akron.
Yeah.
Like, do they have a full motion sim and all that stuff? Like, what do you do in Akron?
Yeah, it's the blimp, right? Like, so you don't really go to blimp school. So it's just all.
Do you?
What? I'm sorry?
How do you?
Yeah,
what do you do?
It's just on the job training. So my first flight that I ever flew was a Cleveland Indians game. And, it was a live TV event. I don't know what I'm doing, right? Like, I mean, we'd had a little bit of ground school, and I at least knew what the blimp looked like. But, I'm there with the training pilot, and we go up and we're flying this night game. And for those of the audience that have ever seen the movie Major League, where he's constantly going, no, it's too high. And I'm like, no, see, the trajectory is right. And we're going back and forth. So I have no clue what I'm doing. But, you just, I think the next event I flew a couple days later was a tire opening store. It's as organized as they can make it, because they don't take it out of service to train. You just kind of just jump in and go. Yeah. And a lot of it too, like when we did, touch and goes, or, float and goes, if you will, we would do those, and they were kind of combination with maintenance flights. And Wingfoot Lake, it's a beautiful area up there. The hangar there is over 100 years old. It's been there forever. It's set up for airships. So it's a great place to train. So that was all awesome. But I mean, it takes about a year before you get signed off, just because it's just so scattered, which is kind of wonderful in that too, because you just get exposure to everything.
Yeah. So you're going up, a baseball game is maybe 3 hours long?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So are you is your flight like, I don't know, an hour there and then 3 hours of flying and an hour back? Or is it like, oh, we're gone like 12 hours or what is that?
Yes to both. So for that event, like it's a TV event, so you go up early and you kind of pregame, if you will. So we fly around, we do the marketing kind of, we're in the air, we're over the stadium, people are coming in. But then if it's a TV event, we're also connected to, we have all our TV equipment on board. Goodyear owns all that. We got the huge Sony Panaflex out front, got the camera operator sitting behind me. He's talking to the director because he has 20 cameras going on. And that is a touch of chaos. For anybody that's never heard a TV event behind the scenes, it is insane. So there's a director just yelling and screaming for hours straight. Camera 20, I need you over here. 2, where are you over here? Looks like 3's dropped off. Okay, going to the Goodyear Blimp now. And we were always treated kind of like that, right? So you're checking in, you're doing that. We got a ground crew setting up satellite uplinks. So you're there for at least an hour before the entire event. You're trying to get the angles and the shots. And then you do kind of a post game as people are coming out for the marketing. And then between Akron, for those who are familiar, between Akron and Cleveland, it's not very far, 50 miles, maybe 40. They're really close together. And that was like an hour transit, hour and a half, depending on winds. Wow. So I think the longest I was ever on board was maybe close to 14 hours.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, but
how many pilots go up with you?
We always flew for safety reasons with 2. It was single pilot certified, but as most things, that's if everything's normal. But one little hiccup, one emergency, one QRH, one radio goes down, you need 2, sometimes 3 people. So there was always 2 pilots. Plus, you're up there so long. We did have a lav in the back, thank goodness. 12, 14 hours could get kind of long. So, we would, and there's no autopilot or anything. You're hand flying the whole time and you're in these hovers trying to hold it steady for the camera to use and change. So it's fatiguing like everything, right? And we would take turns doing that. Sometimes we'd go with 3 if it was a really long event. And then we have the camera crew. There's usually 1 or 2 camera guys on board as well. So, and then if it's a certain events like, I did a Daytona where, I think the president's wife was in the audience. So we had the Secret Service as well. So then you start getting into, even bigger crowds. So, which totally cool guys, by the way. But, things you don't think about. We were getting TFR waivers, right? So, so all sporting events, they have TFRs over them. So we have to work with the FAA on getting waivers, and they know who we are and what we're doing. And they were wonderful to work with. They never denied me for an event, which was great. They were always super accommodating.
Yeah. So interesting. Does it fly like a normal plane?
Partly.
Like, do you fly it like a normal plane? Does it have a yoke, or how does it?
Yeah.
Is it wired and you're just using your hands?
The old ones were. If you see the old videos, it had like a ship's wheel almost in it, but it was mounted sideways, and it was all cables, and that was for the rudder or the elevator, and had rudder pedals. This one was designed in Europe. I think I was told by Airbus engineers, so it was a lot like the 319 or 320. It had a side stick and stuff like that. So, and I ended up flying that 319 or 320 later in life, and it was very similarly designed. So, and you flew that as well, right? You were on that for a time. Yeah. So the whole side.
Only in normal law.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. This kind of just had crazy law. So, so I tell people it was like 50% like a boat, 50% like a helicopter, and 50% like an airplane. Because it was 150% crazier than anything you'd ever flown before. It was just, there was stuff going on everywhere. But it made it really fun too.
Yeah. You mentioned winds.
Yes.
Can the engines just like push you through? Like, is there a max headwind? Like, okay, anything over 6 knots, like we can't take.
Yeah. Like when we were transiting, some of the time, like I think my longest flight was nearly 3 hours back from Cleveland back to Akron, because we were pushing like a 30-knot headwind, and we only fly like 35, 40 knots usually. It'll go faster than that, but it was never really happy that fast. And keep in mind, we're usually flying at 1,000 to 1,500 feet. So that was just an abnormal night to have that much wind that low. So that was a very long transit back.
Did you ever like, hey, the winds are too high, we're not going to do this event, and like scrub it at the last second?
Unfortunately, yeah, we would have wind limits. Of course, just like a normal aircraft, we had our limitations, right? So we would have wind limits, and then also kind of visibility limits because we're doing camera. So if it's lower ceilings or something like that, there's just kind of no point for us to be there. And then the other pieces, the other things you got to think about with the airship is you always have to land into the wind, just like an airplane, but it's not a runway, right? So you can't do a crosswind. There is no such thing as because the thing, once you got it sideways, was a giant sail. It would just start going sideways on you. And we're not landing on a runway and pulling off and setting the parking brake. We have to land to a mast truck because we got to moor it, right? You know, it's not like you just park it and drop the keys off to maintenance and say, have a good night, you know?
What's a mast truck?
So the mast truck it's this crazy contraption that's got kind of this telescoping tower on it with it's got a titanium head on it that the nose of the blimp catches into, and it holds the blimp, and it's castering, so it can caster 360 degrees. It's a pivot point, if you will. So whenever we would go places, we also had to have parking places. I mean, the airship was roughly 250 feet long. You attach the mast truck, which we just called it another 50. So we needed at a minimum 300 feet one direction or 600-foot swing circle all the way around this because it just sits there. It's the world's biggest windsock, right? It'll just cast her into the wind. So we would land in front of this mast truck, and then we had the crew chief, and he had these hydraulics. So he'd stand there with a leader line, and they'd just use carabiners and clip it. And then he had this hydraulic winch, and they'd take the tension out of the line and start pulling us in. Well, while they're doing that, this is like the most dangerous time of an airship is a wind gust or getting sideways to that mast truck and getting blown into it. So you put the engines basically in full beta, full reverse, and you pull against that winch. And so it takes all the slack out of the line. And so you're just kind of pulling each other, and then it just kind of pulls it right in to the connection to the cone. And then you're looking for the green lights that you're connected, kind of like, setting a parking brake. And then you can start shut down. Now it's not going to drag that mast truck. That thing was massive. So I forget how many thousands of pounds that thing weighed. And I mean, it had like 16 tires. I'm sorry.
That's your big anchor. Yeah. Like once you're on that thing, you're good.
Yeah. It was like a modified semi truck is what it was like. It had all.
Are you on the ground by then? Like, are you still kind of like up in the air and then it lowers you down?
A little bit of both, yeah. So when we come in, if you've ever seen pictures of the airship, it's kind of setting at an angle. It's setting on its tail, its nose wheel and its tail wheel. It's buoyant, so it'll has its own center of gravity. It'll sit there and float, so it's only got two wheels. So when we come into that, we're holding it level, so the tail's in the air. So we're level, but the mast truck it's adjusting to your height, and that's the crew chief, and they're a very talented group to learn how to do this. So they're constantly adjusting that height to get them exactly right while you're moving, and you're trying to hold it in this hover with the tail wheel in the air and then let him guide you in. And then once you're close enough, then it'll connect. And for emergency procedures, that was one of our emergency things. And I did have it happen one time. If that line snaps, we have an emergency takeoff procedure. So I know no one's ever heard of this. And I had it happen one time. The line had frayed in the winch. And when I put the pressure on it, when I put it in full reverse and took the slack out of the line, it snapped. And so now I'm just cartwheeling backwards away from this thing. And so, we're at a tired airport. So you just swivel the engines and just shoot up as fast as you can. You do not want to hit that mast, and it's sticking up at least 50 feet into the air, and the wind's trying to blow you that direction. And so, it got sporty real quick. Let's go with that.
Wow. Dude, that's wild. So did you have, there's a backup, I guess. You guys have a second one to go another shot?
We did, yeah. So when we had 3 airship bases and each one had a truck, and sometimes we would travel together. So there would be 2 trucks. But most of the time it was 1 truck, and we had a temporary mast, which the ground crew could erect, but that was going to take about an hour. So it was like this giant Lego set that you put together and kind of drilled it into the ground and stuff. So it was totally old school. Wow. Thankfully, I never had to use it.
So to get from where in South Florida, like you guys have a couple different locations. Where are the locations? Do you remember?
Yes. So the location I was at in South Florida was Pompano Beach, which is just just off of the Fort Lauderdale airport. We were south of it, if I remember right. So we're kind of between Lauderdale and Miami in that area.
Okay.
So that was our location. And so we would range kind of the southeast and kind of up the coast, all the way to Akron was kind of our region. That was our TV region. Then there's the one at corporate headquarters in Akron, Canton, and that's the home of Goodyear. And so they would range, over to New York, up into Canada, and kind of into the Midwest. And then there's a third one that kind of set in a base out. It's just part of the greater LA area. And so they would range pretty much the West Coast. And that's kind of how we geographically broke up the U.S. Now, airship, it's got a pretty low service ceiling, so you're never going to see it in like Denver or up in Montana because it's just too high. So anytime you had to transition an airship all the way across the country, you had to go way, way down south and go through the passes. And that was about as high as you could get it to go through. So I never did transit one clear across the country. That would have been really cool, but that is a very, very long, long trip.
Yeah.
You can imagine it, 35 knots, and you never go anywhere in a straight line. We follow roads, marketing material, right? We're following the roads, and so people can see it. And related to that, my buddy was flying it one day, and we'd have a radio, and he was just listening to a radio station, and he says, all of a sudden, music interrupts. The DJ comes on and goes, "Hey, I don't care what you're doing. Get outside because the Goodyear Blimp's going over." Like, dude, that's totally cool. Yeah.
Man. Okay, so you would leave Pompano and you need to go to a Carolina Panthers game, and you would leave early. You would fly the thing out there, and then the mast truck and the whole posse, like, was there this huge convoy, like you're moving, like you're moving a nuclear warhead?
Absolutely. I called it the traveling circus. We would leave days in advance usually because keeping in mind we're a branch of marketing. So on the way, we might do an overfly for a factory or go do rides somewhere or something like that. So it was a multi-day event, right? And then as far as the trucks, we have a mobile maintenance facility, which was a giant semi. And then we had the crew van, which was this bus. And then we'd have 2 or 3 vans pulling trailers with all the extra equipment in it. And then we'd have 1 or 2 like media PR cars. And so it was just this traveling circus, plus then the blimp following along. And the limiting factor was not the airship. The airship could fly probably in long range cruise like over 24 hours on its fuel burn.
Wow.
The limiting factor, I know, right? I wouldn't think I don't want to be on it that long, but not without some snacks at least. But
let me guess, the limiting factor was the laugh.
I won't go into, there were ways to, maybe refresh that, but I won't go into But the limiting factor was our ground crews, because that's a DOT driving position, right? So they're limited to 8 hours over the road. So what we tried to do is plan no more than like 300 miles a day, if I remember right, maybe 250 miles a day. So, and their job, I mean, they worked so hard. They were such a great group of guys. We would launch. And so we'd be there, an hour or two before launch. We'd launch, we'd take off and go fly. They'd have to tear all the equipment down of wherever we were, pack it all up, get on the road, get in front of us, go there, be there before us, and set it all back up. So they would have some really long days.
One thing that most people don't know about me is, for a very, very short period of time, I was a roadie.
Were you really now?
For a band, and like a real band. And I did stage setup.
Okay.
And it was the worst job I've ever had. It's so hard. It is so much, like, it's worse because it's so hard and so long hours and exhausting. And, the cool things already happened. And then hours later, just to pack up and to get on the road, and you're sweaty and there's nowhere to take a shower, and you've got to go to one other place. Like, that is
100% what it is. 100% what it is. And like when I wasn't flying, I would help out with them. And then you gain some respect when you start doing the work. You're like, okay, this is a lot of work. And, we were always in our pilot uniform. So, a white shirt packing stuff up. Yeah, that's just not going to end well. So I ruined a lot of shirts.
Did you wear like a pilot shirt, or did you wear like a Goodyear polo? Like what was the uniform? Like a full dress, like double-breasted suit? Like what were you doing?
We had both. So when we were in the public eye, if you will, we had the full pilot uniform, and And then if we were doing work days, we had the polos and stuff like that we could wear as well. And that was part of the crew bus too. Once the public and the cameras had left and they were packing everything up and everybody else kind of went home, we could go in the crew bus and change, and put on the polo shirt so you wouldn't mess everything up. But, it kind of just varied whether you were going to stay in the public eye or if you were flying. And then a lot of times when we traveled too, we would travel in uniform because we'd stop at roadside stops and stuff. And of course, all this equipment pulls in. The blimp had just gone overhead. So you're attracting this crowd. And the coolest thing was like when you stop these roadside places, I'd go in and get lunch and it was always free. And I thought, man, I have made it. I am cool. Until somebody told me that, no, they're giving it to you free because they think you're one of the bus drivers. Because, these roadside places, when the tour buses pull in, they give the drivers free lunch so that they'll come back. So
I had no idea. so smart.
Yeah, so it kind of burst my bubble. I'm like, yeah, I'm so cool. I'm a Goodyear Blimp. Now they think you're one of the bus drivers, dude. And nothing against the bus drivers, but I just thought that was freaking hilarious. I'm like, oh yeah, I get that now.
Yeah. I've never thought about that.
Right? It's a great marketing, right? So
sure, that's smart. What so you mentioned giving rides. Like, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
How many people can you fit in there?
So the gondola will hold, if I remember right, it was 14. I never had 14 in it, maybe about 8 for kind of just weight and balance purposes, if you will. It's the easiest way to think about it because it's weight and balance things are a little different. I can get to that in a second. But so about 8 people at a time. We'd always fly with the 2 pilots. One would be flying and then one would be what we called the flight attendant. They would get everybody on, get everybody off. And it makes you I have a lot of respect for flight attendants and, trying to herd everybody. And then you're kind of the tour guide and telling everybody about stuff. So the only way you could ever really get a ride was corporate invite. The president of Goodyear invites whoever, right? Okay, that makes sense. Sure, it's theirs. They can do what they want, right? PR events, the media, of course, because we're marketing. And then the third one was everything we did outside of TV was basically not-for-profit work. And so we would work with like Toys for Tots. And that was one of our big events. Absolutely loved that one. And we would raffle rides, 2 seats. And they would get thousands and thousands of dollars for these things. And it just all goes to charity. So I loved that. That was so much fun. The Marines were there. The cars were coming through and just unloading presents. We're raffling the rides, people asking you questions. I mean, that was the really, really fun stuff, right?
Yeah, listen, I'm an attention hound. Like I would love just spending time with people and having those conversations. Like what a thing. Like, and you're getting paid to do it.
And you're getting paid to do it, right? Yeah.
I would pay somebody to do that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So those were basically the 3 ways you could get on board. Was basically know somebody, be somebody, or pay your way on. I guess are the 3 kind of ways.
So basically, I have no chance, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
All right.
Like we had ground crew guys that had never been on the blimp. I know it sounds insane, but they had never gotten a ride. It was just really, really hard to get on. One of the coolest things I ever saw with that was there's somewhere along the East Coast. It was around Plymouth, and some individual that owned a massive amount of tire stores up there. Every so many years, he would basically for charity. We'd come up and he'd donate some massive amount to charity or whatever it was, and give all of his employees rides. So we'd be up there for days just doing rides. And one day, some people didn't show or they had a meeting and they missed it. And so I just happened to be standing in the FBO, and he walked in, the owner of this huge company, and he was there every day, all day long, which I thought was, being pretty stand up, for an owner of a huge corporation, right? He walks in and there's a grandmother and her son out there having lunch, watching the airplanes. And they just finished up, and the son was, 7, 8 years old. And he said, "What are you guys doing?" And they're like, "Oh, we're just watching the airplanes." And he goes, "Come with me." And he put them on. And I was like, that was just like, you're never going to see that happen, right? I actually got to witness it happen. Yeah, it was really, really super cool. It's just one of those memories that sticks with you, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the person you want to be.
Yeah, that kid's probably a Blue Angel right now.
Yeah, probably. He's probably never forgotten that, right? That's just one of those kind of moments in your life. You're the right place at the right time.
Hey, pilot. Does your pilot uniform make a short flight feel like a transcon slog?
Flight Uniforms have reinvented aviation shirts with 3D stretch, stain repellents, and no wrinkles. These shirts are just plain comfortable and ready for takeoff right out of your rollerboard. Flight Uniform is trusted by more than 25,000 pilots, and their flagship flight shirt has over 1,500 five-star reviews. I've worn every pilot shirt out there, and if you know me, you know I only wear Flight Uniforms. Be the envy of every cockpit at flightuniform.com and get a special podcast exclusive discount with the code SpitfirePod20 to take 20% off your first order at flightuniform.com. Listen, what a life event.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I think I've mentioned it on this show before, but the funniest, maybe it was when you and I were talking, the funniest thing I've ever heard on the radios in my whole life. I was flying a helicopter with the Navy. We were VFR flight following from wherever to wherever.
Right.
And there's a Southwest plane climbing out, and he checks on, and they say, Southwest such and such, you've got traffic at 1:00. And the guy's like, we're looking for traffic. We don't see them. And there's a pause, and then all of a sudden another voice comes on the radio and says, I'm a 300-foot long red, white, and blue blimp. It is absolutely impossible not to see me. And then Southwest traffic's
inside. Oh my God.
It was so funny.
It was a lot of times on that note, because we would try to avoid busy airspace because we could shut down airspace because, we move so slow. But a lot of times, we'd be transitioning around like Atlanta. So we'd be talking to them, just VFR flight balling, right? And our tail numbers were like original tail numbers. So they were like 1 Alpha, 2 Alpha, and 3 Alpha. That was it. So November 1 Alpha, one of the ships I flew, and the controllers are busy and blah, blah, blah. And you'd say, Wingfoot was our call sign. I'd say, Wingfoot 1 Alpha requesting blah, 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 right? And they were busy, and the guy come back and say full call sign. November 1 Alpha? I mean, right? It's just like, I'm sorry, dude, that's it. But they're used to these, 8603 Papa Delta, whatever,
I know. I met a guy that buys tail numbers from the FAA and then resells them. He buys November 1 Kilo Echo and sells it to Nike, right? Like I met some guy that does that, and he makes a ton of money. I was like, man, I should do that job.
I didn't realize that was a thing until I got to Goodyear. And I guess at one time, Goodyear owned a ton of them. They owned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, for all of them. And I don't know how many they still possibly own. I didn't even know that was a thing, right? The stuff you learn, the more you do, you just never stop learning. You're like, wow, you can buy N numbers and resell them? Really? Who knew?
Yeah. So nuts. All right. Well, it's a big year coming up for Goodyear as well, right?
Yes. So the hangar in Akron is over 100 years old, and they had the celebration for that a few years ago. But the big one is in 2025. Because they have been, I believe, and you can go out to GoodyearBlimp.com and it'll tell you all about it. But they have been continuously operating lighter than air for 100 years in 25. So I think they started in 1925 with their first, definition of commercial airship operations, which is just mind-boggling to think about. That level of history. 1925, aviation was still just getting going. And it basically started, I think, to advertise aviation fabrics for aircraft. I think is kind of how it kind of started. They talk all about it, and I don't want to misquote it. They have it all in the history on the website. It's fascinating. There's so much history that you didn't realize that was going on. And it's still continued to operate. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I'll put GoodyearBlimp.com in the show description so somebody can jump over to that if they want to check it out. The plot twist, you decided one day to leave and go on.
I know, right? You kind of, I guess that's where I come back to never pass up an opportunity. You kind of take opportunities where they are. And I'd been there for several years and absolutely loved it. Worked with a bunch of really amazing guys. But I honestly just kind of missed the airlines. And I know that's going to sound weird. And for anybody that's headed towards the airlines, I got to say, go watch Living the Dream, the Lego, the very first one, because, and you'll agree, because everything that is in that is true.
It's unbelievably accurate. That guy is an American treasure.
Yes, he is. Like my nephew is getting into aviation, and before he started, I said, "Watch this, and if any of that bothers you, maybe consider something else."
That's right,
because it is all true. But yeah, I just kind of, I don't know. I did it. I loved it, but I've always taken that philosophy of just don't pass up an opportunity. And I had an opportunity to return to the airlines, and I decided to go. It was agonizing decision, but decided to go ahead and take it. And again, never have looked back since then. Been a captain in the airlines. You and I have met, did union work, flew for a cargo company, saw the world, all kinds of crazy stuff, and never regretted a minute of it.
Yeah. And you're at a major airline now.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I've wanted to talk to you for a long, long time.
Oh, thank you.
All that. Yeah, for sure. But not about Goodyear, because like our mutual friend
Corey, yeah. Shout out to Corey.
Hats off. Shout out to Corey. Journeys Uncharted on Instagram.
Absolutely.
If you guys want to follow great photography. He was, I wouldn't say like a year ago, said, "Yeah, why don't you talk to Andy about flying the Goodyear Blimp?" I said, "What? Andy for Goodyear Blimp? I've known Andy for 7 years and he's never once talked about flying the Goodyear Blimp."
Oh.
Like, what is happening in my life?
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I don't know. It's not something I lead with, but it sure was a good resume lister. I got a lot of interviews because of it.
Talk to me about what they like. Did they eat that up when you went to your major interview? Were they like, all right, all this aside, like, let's talk Goodyear Blimp?
Yeah, there have been a couple of interviews that I've had where I really wasn't asked any questions other than about the airship, which those were great interviews because I am my own favorite topic, right? Like most pilots, right?
Yeah.
So one place I went after I was in ground training, somebody sent me a picture of it. And I guess on their recruiting page, they put a picture of the blimp and it said something like now hiring blimp pilots. And that was after I had interviewed. So somebody got the idea to use it as marketing material. So it did. Awesome. It has opened a lot of doors, and it's been a lot of fun to talk about. And I'm always excited that people are excited to hear about it.
Yeah, and you talked to one of the muckety mucks at Goodyear before this interview.
Yes.
Are they hiring pilots? Are they looking for pilots? Do you know?
I think they may be. It's ever evolving. I think they lost a few during the hiring boom. But he wasn't real clear whether or not when they were going to be looking or if they're looking. And it is honestly such a coveted job. It's almost you got to know somebody or be in the right place at the right time. But again, if it was anywhere, it would be on the website. And I wouldn't discourage anybody if they were looking for something different, if they were just maybe a little burned out or tired. What an opportunity it was for me.
What an opportunity.
Yeah.
What a cool thing. Like, I feel like I want to do my tail wheel. I want to do my seaplane. And man, if there's ever a shot to get a lighter than air, like what an opportunity.
Yeah. That's, as far as, because there's like 3, I was told there are 3. I've only ever been able to really locate 2 of that lighter than air license. So somebody told me there was like the lighter than air something or another, which is like in the movie Up where the guy just ties the balloons to his house and he floats away, right? I don't know if that's really true or not, but then the second one is the hot air balloon, lighter than air, hot air, right? And, and I've been accused of that a few times. But then the third one, being the hot air, but the third one is the rare one, is the lighter than air airship. And probably still to this day, there's less than 100 people that have ever held that license. It's just.
So it's on your FAA certificate?
It is. It says LTA airship. And that is always really, really good from recurrent standpoints to make sure I turn it over and make sure they see that, because that eats up questions time, right?
The APD's like, what is this?
Yeah, exactly. And usually there is somebody that goes, you are the second person I've met. And which is crazy because of the people in the airlines, there's like 3 or 4 of us that are now in the airlines, and I know all of them. And I'm like, oh, was it this guy? And so it's one of those kind of crazy things. Somebody always is like, I think I knew somebody, and it's a short list. You can just start running through it.
That's so good. Well, I am proud that I get to know you
well,
and that we
you.
get to be friends.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, dude. You're so good. I thank you for coming on today. Thank you for sharing. What an adventure.
Thank you.
I've been looking forward to this. I'm just like bubbling over. So thank you for sharing with the pilots. Thank you for what you've done for our community. Thank you for your ALPA work, which you have done a ton of. And keep slugging away, keep helping pilots because you're awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And the same to you as well, because I know we were both there at the same time and we did a tremendous amount of work. So hopefully we help some people in their careers.
All right, pilots, that's a wrap on this episode. And I know what you're thinking. You need to make yourself a little bit better. So how do you make yourself a little bit better? You tighten up your resume. So here's what I want you to do. Go over to my website, spitfireelite.com/podcast, and you can download my free resume template. It is tight, organized, and it's the perfect pilot resume. It's just something I like to do for the pilot group, and it is free to you. So go over there, spitfireelite.com/podcast, and download your free resume template. While you're over there, look at all the services that we offer. Lots of great interview prep, lots of great application review. Everything you need to be a professional pilot is right there. spitfireelite.com/podcast. Thanks, and I'll see you on the next episode.